Well, good morning and welcome to another Military Monday morning. My name is Kathleen Smith, Chief Outreach Officer of ClearedJobs.Net, and I'm joined by Bob Wheeler, one of our account managers here at ClearedJobs.Net. Good morning, Bob. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Kathleen. I'm doing great. Happy Monday to you.
It is a great Monday. I know some people know about your background, but can you give us a quick little background about yourself?
Yeah, the little 15-second blurb is basically I was in the Navy for 20 years. Most of that, I was a hospital corpsman in the Navy. Most of that time was spent with the Marine Corps. My last 3 years, I recruited doctors up in the Maryland area, and that's how I got into recruiting. From the recruiting field, I eventually transitioned into working in human resources, and now I've been at ClearedJobs.Net since 2014. This is the only job I've had since I got out of the Navy. I still have pretty deep ties to the military. My son's a sergeant in the Marine Corps. My wife still works on base. I still talk to folks in the Chief's Mess and talk to transitioning veterans quite a bit. So get to play in both worlds there.
And we're so lucky to have you. So, this morning's topic is resumes. And when we talk in recruiting in general, people think that their resume is not a very important tool. But we have been learning in this new world of virtual job search that it really is an important tool because it is the first thing that a recruiter is going to see that represents yourself. And it is not only it's not a life story, but it is an advertisement. It is meant to get you that first call. It's meant to get you that first entree to the recruiter who's going to get you through the talent pipeline. So, Bob, what are some of the challenges that transitioning military personnel have with their resume? I mean, a lot of people talk about demilitarizing your resume, but is that really a good thing?
Well, it's yes and no. And I think that the first challenge that a lot of transitioning veterans get is they get so much advice. And there's lots of advice that just gets thrown out there. They say good advice is what's good for 80% of the people, 80% of the time. But a lot of folks coming out of the service, they don't fall into one of those 80%. So, the idea of demilitarizing your resume, and yes, it's good advice, but also it might not be. So the question really becomes, what are you trying to use this resume for? Who are you trying to get it out to? Because if you are in the government contracting spaces, for example, if you are a F-35 mechanic and you're want to talk to somebody about the F-35, you certainly want to mention that you worked on the F-35, for example. So knowing who you're talking to, what company you're speaking with, and what kind of positions that you're talking about will let you know how much and how little to demilitarize your resume, or sometimes you might even want to highlight some of the things that you've done working with tools or working in locations or working with groups or something like that. Yes, it's good advice, but it's not always advice for everybody in every situation.
And what are some of the common mistakes that you see that transitioning military do on their resume?
Well, there's a few mistakes. Well, first of all, the biggest mistake that people make when they come out of the military, and I tell people this, is you want to distill your resume, not dilute it. So they throw up, like you kind of said, their whole life story, or like, how do I fit a 20-year career into just 2 pages? Well, let me make it 5 pages. Let me, do those types of things. And when you do that, it becomes something that's very hard for the recruiter or the hiring manager to really utilize. I mean, a resume is a tool for them to utilize. And so when you put too many things out there or just too much stuff on there, you dilute the good stuff that they really want to see.
And, we talk about a standard format for a resume. So why don't we just sort of do a little background here on as you as a recruiter, what was the easiest way for you to look at a resume? Because I know a lot of recruiters have a challenge by saying it's like going on a scavenger hunt looking through someone's resume. What are some of
Yeah.
the key points?
Yeah, and this is really critical too, and I'm going to bring this up, and I want people to think about today's environment where you're having to do things virtually. For example, we do virtual job fairs, and it can be a challenge for the recruiter to talk to somebody while they're looking at a resume for the first time. So you want to make it so easy. So the things that you want to look at is, a very brief summary section right up top that says, what it is that you do. If you're coming out of the military, you know, let people know when you're coming out, available for work October 2020, whatever it is. So let people know what it is that you do, let people know when you're going to be getting out, and really describing that, but not too much and not with too much flowery language. After that, if you've got specific skills or tools that you used, hit on those specific tools and skills and list those like in bullet points, because the recruiters and hiring managers love to see those things, especially in technical positions, because they want to see if you use the same types of tools that they're using. And then the third piece that's the most important is honestly that very first job that you're doing, the title of the job, because recruiters, if they can look at that summary that says what you do when you get out, what kind of tools you're using, and what you're doing right now, that is the beginning. It drives which way the conversation goes. Are they going to be interested in talking to you further, or are they going to be just kind of, being nice and just listening to your story?
Now, we touched on in a previous session about the value of your network. And I know that a lot of transitioning veterans really don't think about those initial questions. So, what is some of the research that veterans should do when they're approaching a company or looking at a company to apply for? And, do they then leverage their network for that?
Yeah, and this goes right in with, is it always a good idea to demilitarize your resume? That when you have a network of people at a company that you're going to be applying to, the more you know those things, the more you know how much or how little to demilitarize your resume. If you know that the person who's involved in the hiring decision is is a veteran who worked in the same type of place that you did, doing the same types of things, you don't need to demilitarize that particular resume that much. But if you're applying for a position, or you're trying to network into a position where they have zero experience, well, then you really need to demilitarize it and explain it. So when you look those things up, when you look at people on LinkedIn, but when you talk to your network to say, hey, you work at such and such a company, what's their veteran like presence like? How fluent are they in veteran? And
Mhm.
if they're very fluent, then you can speak your veteran. If they're not, then you need to translate, ahead of time.
We keep using this term demilitarize. Can you give us some examples of what would be a very militarized term and how someone would demilitarize that?
Yeah, when it comes to terms, some of the things, when you start listing, just your specific, like I was a hospital corpsman. I mean, there's a lot of people who can't pronounce corpsman because it's got a P in the middle of it, let alone know what a hospital corpsman does. So if I were to just list myself as hospital corpsman, they wouldn't have known, and they certainly wouldn't have known that the last 3 years I was recruiting. So I would have listed myself as a healthcare recruiter, not as a hospital corpsman. Kind of the same thing goes when you look at job titles, as far as, not just your rank as far as being a sergeant or a lieutenant colonel or whatever, but listing, the billet. People like to list their billet as, as operations maintenance chief. That doesn't really always translate. And then if you start, we'll get into a second about throwing too many, big fluffy words in there, you actually only confuse people. So one of the first things to look at when you demilitarize is things like job titles.
Wonderful. So we hear this all the time that, your resume is a document, and a document that is introduced to a recruiter who then understands, where you're going to fit next in the company. But a lot of people also believe it's their fitness report. Is that
Hmm.
the same thing?
Not at all. I know in transition classes, they will tell you, use your fitness report to drive your resume, because it's captured all the things that you did. But a fitness report is written to a promotion board, or to things like that. It's not written to a hiring place. And people make the mistake of just kind of cutting and pasting because it feels good. They use things like, flowery language. But one of the biggest things I see the difference is that usually on fitness reports in the military, and this is not for everybody, but by and large, in the military, the farther up you go, the more you rely on what your people did. You say, I led and managed a team of 65 people who did this, 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 and this. So your fitness report ends up quantifying all the things that your people did, but it doesn't explain what you did as an individual. And when you get out of the military, you're moving from being, a manager and leader of a large group to being a single person who's hired to do a single job. And so you need to focus on what you did, not just what your team did.
Great. And this is one area that when I do reviews of transitioning military resume, they don't really talk about the resume in business sense.
Hmm.
So can you give us some examples of what something would be in the military and how people can translate that into adding business value to the company that they're
Yeah.
applying for?
Yeah, so certainly things about business, and it's one of the challenges that military folks have is many times they don't understand the differences between the military and the business world. So therefore, they're not even prepared to talk about things. You know, we like to say in the military how you managed a budget of up to $15 million or something like that because you found every way to count every dollar of every program that fell underneath you. You know, that's an impressive number, but when it comes to a resume, you're not really talking about what you did to manage that budget. And we feel like we make the mistake of thinking that the phrase responsible for is is an action, but it's not. Being responsible for something is not the same as, you know, truly managing it, truly administering it. So instead of managing a budget, if you administer a budget, how did you do that? What steps did you take to allocate funds? What steps did you take to, request new funds? What, to justify things? All of that is more important than just saying I managed a budget of fill in the blank, big number dollars.
Hmm. And this is an area I also see a lot of veterans don't put in their resume when they manage a variety of different people. I mean, they can manage an entire platoon,
Hmm.
but they don't explain what workforce management is. Can you give an example of how someone who said that they were, a platoon leader, how that would translate into business terms?
Yeah, so when it comes to being a platoon leader, a lot of it's going to depend upon what kind of platoon was it. And there's a difference between an infantry platoon, and a small group of people that work at the motor T and do truck driving, or the people who work in the communication section that take care of radios and satellite communications. So instead of just saying that you led and managed a certain number of people, breaking down, what types of people those were, what types of skills that they had, and then really thinking about how do those people apply to the positions that you're looking to try to transition into. So it's particularly, I think the people who have the hardest time are the people that come out of the service and they just don't know what they want to do, and so they're trying to capture a little bit of everything. But if you're one of those people who came out of a technical background, if you say you did satellite communications, listing the different types of people, that were working for you, with you, under you type things, and what specific tools they used, and how you made those people fit together, putting those teams together. But it really helps if you can list specific tools that those folks used.
And, some of the areas of the fitness report or, other documentation we've seen people list all their awards and
Yeah.
certs and things like that. Can you sort of like pull the wheat from the chaff on what should someone be listing, what someone should not be listing?
Yeah, so when it comes to awards, and there's a lot of people who have back and forth on this. So there's some awards that are different than others. And that's just all there is to it. Some awards you get for doing something very specific, and some awards you get for just being someplace at the right time, or just not getting in trouble. I did a list, just ran a search this morning. 767 resumes in our database have someone listing their Good Conduct Award, which is an enlisted award for just not getting in trouble for 4 years. You know, it's a award you wear in your uniform, but it's really, it's not the thing that's going to highlight you to get, a job or not going to get a job. So when you're looking at some of those awards, if you just list the name of the award, that's the other problem. I saw 428 resumes just listed Bronze Star. That's a pretty impressive award. But it's usually given for very specific things. You can get a Bronze Star with a V for getting shot at and saving people's lives, or you can get a Bronze Star without a V for, running the logistics chain, in Afghanistan for 6 months, doing it very well. So don't just list the award. You need to say what you did for that award. And instead of listing it, just all your awards at the end, if you got a Bronze Star for running a logistics chain in Afghanistan back in 2013, and you're applying for a job that deals with logistics, what you want to do is you want to list those accomplishments in the right section of your resume. Under 2013, I did this logistics, blah, 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 explaining those things. And then in the end, put received Bronze Star for this action or something like that. Because really the focus is what you did to get the award, not just the fact that you got an award. And then you can look back and say, well, and some of these things don't even need to be on there. Good Conduct Medal, National Defense Ribbon, Expert Marksmanship Badge, unless they specifically pertain to what you're applying for, all they do is dilute the resume. And if people are reading it that aren't military, they look at things and they go, I have no idea what that means. And so you've separated yourself from them instead of bringing yourself closer to them.
Wonderful. So let's sort of summarize some of the resume tips. So one, demilitarize or not to demilitarize your resume. What do you say?
I say you need to know what every resume needs to be as specific as possible. So while in general you should be prepared to demilitarize your resume, don't take that as gospel. Look and see, because there could be a time that you need to really focus on the things that you did do and be very specific, because that might help you if the position that you're looking for or the company you're looking for still works with the military.
We do have a question. So when we have a lot of people who have 20, 30 years of experience, and we run into this all the time where
Yeah.
people say, I have a lot of years of experience. What's your response to that?
Yeah, and I faced that too. I mean, I got out of the Navy with 20 years, and I had to decide how I was going to put my resume together. And luckily, as a recruiter, I kind of knew what the best advice I can give folks is, you know, to think to yourself that the last 10 years is the most important. So what you're going to put is the last 10 years are the most important. You might want to break those down by specific duty stations or jobs that you had, instead of just saying that you were in the Navy for 20 years or the Army for 25 years or something like that. List those duty stations that you had, and your number of bullets kind of dwindle down like a funnel. So the most recent job that you had should have the most meat on it as far as the bullets go. And as you kind of get farther down, the job you had 5 years ago maybe has even less bullets. But all of your bullets need to be focused on what you do. And sometimes I think a mistake that people make is they think, well, this was a really cool thing I did. I was in combat or something like that. If that doesn't pertain to the job, it doesn't need to be on the resume, even if it's the coolest thing you did. So just listing the last 10 years. And if you want to, at the very end, if you wanted to say, you listed your last few jobs, and then you just list previous duty stations prior and just list it bing, 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 bing as a list at the bottom. You can do that if you want to, but just know that the meat of your resume is the top. So don't dilute it with all the stuff you did, and don't feel like you have to tell your whole life story of that you were the junior sailor of the quarter, when you were an E2, um, you know, when you're getting out as a Master Chief Petty Officer or something like that.
Another question is, a lot of people have a varied background.
Mm-hmm.
So they may have moved duty stations, or they may have, moved what they have done in their overall military career. How does someone take a varied background and put it on a resume to apply for a job? Do they put everything on there, or how do they sift through this?
That's a great question. It's a real problem that we have in the military, because the military likes to move you around. If you stick around long enough, they'll say, well, you've done operational stuff for 3 years, now go teach. Oh, now you've taught for 3 years, now go recruit. So maybe you were a communications expert, but you've done all of these different things. So it really kind of comes down to a couple things. One, knowing the job that you're applying for, and then highlighting those skills. Some of the things that you might want to rely on, from a few years ago, you might need to just put those in your bullets. But it also, a smart transition involves knowing when to kind of pull the cord and get out of the military. And the job that you had the last is the most, relevant job for your future, like it or not. If the last thing that you're doing is teaching, and you haven't touched a piece of equipment for real in 7 years, it's hard to make that case that you're still good on a brand new piece of equipment. So when you've got that varied background, you do have to look at what you've done recently and just know that that's, you're kind of, that's your strongest suit. If you want to rely on something you did in the past, it's going to be more difficult, but you can still bring up what you've done recently to continue to work with those things. But it's a challenge, and everybody's unique. But and again, it goes back to the more network you have, the more you can talk to people, and then the more they get to know you as a person, not just you as a resume.
We have so many people who their transition is being sort of lengthened right now.
Yeah.
And, PCS orders are sort of on hold in some instances. There are so many resources that our military personnel can, tap into at this point. What do you see, given the current marketplace? What are some of the additional certifications or trainings that military personnel should be thinking about right now?
A lot of it's going to depend upon your specific field, but I think that any certification if it's field relevant is going to be good, because it can help you make sure you're learning the lingo, finding out how, what people call this, what people call that. I mean, my experience in human resources, that was a big eye opener when I got my human resources certifications, because I realized things that I was doing, or it also helps you see the gaps or things that you found out were really important to the private sector, which were not important to the military. So I think that there's no specific list for every veteran, but I think that it would be a mistake to act like that there's nothing they can do. So the more they can get involved in the industries that they're looking at, that's the biggest thing. And that's, looking at when you see somebody in your industry that's got letters after their name, look it up. Google it to find out what those initials stand for and see what kind of certification that is, and then help to figure out if it's something that you need. And it's a great question to reach out to when you're trying to do informational interviews. If you say, hey, I see you've got this certification, I'd like to learn more about it. I'm coming out of the Army. I'd like to learn more about this. People will be easy to help because they want to explain it, and you can get some good information that way.
And that goes back to something that we talked about in another episode, talking about the value of your network. And you always should be networking, right, Bob?
Well, I think every webinar we do, we're going to end up talking about your network a little bit, because it really is the most important thing that you can do. All the rest of these things, kind of, your network can amplify them. Every other thing that we talk about is going to be made better or worse depending on how strong your network is.
Well, great. Well, Bob, thank you so much for your time this Military Monday morning. I look forward to talking to you later today and other topics that we have going. Thank you again for your service, and thank you for being part of
Absolutely.
ClearedJobs.net.
And like I say all the time, for the veterans out there, hit me up, Bob Wheeler, on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with any veteran at any time.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.